a flickering torch, the smell of scorched linen, the soft crunch of bone under a hobnailed sandal. 3 dead slaves lay beside a collapsed column. The atrium still burned, smoke curling toward the moonlit sky. Somewhere, beneath the rubble, a child whimpered. That night, the house of the Licinii Crassi was sacked not by foreign invaders, but by other Romans, armed and wild-eyed, loyal to no ideal but survival. It was Sulla's war, and it had turned the forum into a charnel ground. One body was dragged into the street, its face already eaten by dogs. This was the world Marcus Licinius Crassus was born into powerful lineage, noble blood, and a front-row seat to a dying republic's most violent convulsions. Today we uncover the man whose hunger devoured Rome itself, Crassus, the richest Roman to ever live, and the one they say choked on molten gold. Crassus was born in 115 BCE into a senatorial family that traced its lineage to the early republic. His father, Publius Licinius Crassus, had served as consul and censor, one of Rome's elite. But elite blood meant little in an age where heads were cheaper than loaves of bread. During Sulla's civil war, the elder Crassus aligned himself with the dictator's cause. It earned him short-term glory and eventual catastrophe. Crassus' older brother died in the conflict. His father committed suicide to avoid execution by Marius mobs. Their estates were seized, their fortunes scattered. Young Marcus survived by fleeing to Hispania. He took with him 3 things: a name, a grudge, and an insatiable instinct for survival. While in hiding, Crassus did not merely bide his time. He learned the art of maneuver, not just militarily, but socially, politically, and financially. When Sulla eventually triumphed and the Senate restored itself, Crassus returned to Rome not as a broken refugee, but as a calculating predator. Historians still debate whether it was trauma or temperament that made Crassus so obsessed with control. Some argue that witnessing his family's downfall turned him into a hoarder of power. Others see something colder, a man who was always a wolf beneath a toga. What's certain is that Crassus saw chaos not as tragedy, but opportunity. Rome in the early 1st century BCE was a city of flickering torchlight and thunderous voices. Senators barked beneath frescoed ceilings, slaves whispered in marble hallways, and soldiers marched through cobbled alleys slick with animal blood. Crassus returned to this world not to mourn what he'd lost, but to take what remained. His first act of genius was modest on the surface. He began buying properties confiscated from Sulla's enemies. These prescriptions legalized executions, stripped thousands of men of land, homes, and wealth. Sulla auctioned these assets off at obscenely low prices, eager to reward allies and bankrupt enemies. Crassus was there at every auction, bidding with borrowed coin and sharp eyes. He bought homes, farms, even entire districts. Then he waited. As order returned and survivors came crawling back to Rome, Crassus sold everything back at tenfold the price. It was dirty business, but it made him rich. Still, this was only the beginning. A lesser man would have stopped at wealth. Crassus wanted control, and control in Rome was built on 3 pillars: property, patronage, and fear. So he became a master of all 3. He acquired more than 500 slaves, carpenters, architects, masons, and trained them into a mobile construction corps. Whenever a fire tore through Rome's crowded tenements, and it often did, Crassus would arrive swiftly and offer to buy the smoldering ruins at a steep discount. Only then would his slaves begin to rebuild. It's one of the stranger truths of Roman urban life. Fires were frequent, fatal, and profitable for the right man. Crassus, according to some, set a few of them himself. Whether that's true remains debated. What's undeniable is that he turned ruin into revenue, smoke into silver. And not just silver. Crassus dabbled in everything, from silver mines in Spain to gladiator schools in Capua. He even owned a portion of the city's funeral industry, making coin from death's every turn. It was a grotesque symphony. While Rome wept, Crassus counted coins. There's a fringe theory whispered among some scholars that Crassus' greed was pathological, even compulsive. One anecdote, possibly apocryphal, claims he measured his wealth not by coin or land, but by how many men he could feed daily. The number exceeded 20,000. But Crassus did not merely want to be rich. He wanted what every Roman aristocrat truly craved: dignitas, the intangible aura of glory, earned on the battlefield or in the Senate. And for that, he needed a war. His first true taste of command came with the most grotesque uprising in Rome's recent memory, the Spartacus Rebellion. It was here that Crassus would show just how far he was willing to go for power. But we'll return to that. For now, remember this: Crassus was no visionary. He was no orator like Cicero, no genius like Caesar, no general like Pompey. But he was the man who waited. And when Rome bled, he drank deeply. By the time most senators rose for the morning salutatio, the ritual greeting of clients, Marcus Licinius Crassus had already bought a house, sold to others, and condemned a man to ruin. He was, by the 70s BCE, a name spoken with both reverence and dread. Rome had never seen a merchant of tragedy quite like him. Fires in the Suburra were common. The neighborhood was a haphazard warren of wooden tenements, rope bridges, and overflowing privies. A single spark could consume blocks. And when it did, Crassus' men arrived like crows, equipped with buckets, ropes, and axes. His slave brigades didn't just fight fire. They negotiated with desperation. A tenant might scream for help, a landlord plead to save a collapsing insula. Crassus offered a price, always far below its worth. If the answer was no, he'd step back and watch it burn. One scholar likened his approach to a fire auction in real time, where the price of mercy rose with every falling beam. Crassus wasn't content with simply purchasing ruin. He institutionalized it. He became Rome's de facto fire brigade and demolition service, and he was paid handsomely for both. But that alone couldn't explain the volume of disasters from which he profited. Some whispered that Crassus ordered fires started under cover of night. Others believed he paid petty arsonists in wine and bread to stoke disaster in the city's poorest districts. There's no hard evidence. But the pattern was striking. Tragedy followed Crassus like a shadow. In Capua, far from the smoke and politics of the capital, Crassus also owned something more gruesome: a gladiator school. Here, men were broken down and rebuilt, not just into fighters, but into fuel for Rome's bloodlust. The most famous of these was Spartacus, a Thracian soldier turned slave who would eventually do the unthinkable. But even before the rebellion, Crassus' investment in death as spectacle was lucrative. He supplied gladiators to the wealthiest families, trained killers for birthday games, and even rented out full amphitheater packages to provincial governors eager to win votes. The irony was glaring. A man born into senatorial dignity now made coin from charred wood and torn flesh. But in a city where funeral processions clogged the streets and the smell of cremated corpses was a daily incense, death wasn't taboo. It was transactional. Crassus didn't just collect property. He collected people. Thousands of clients lined his atrium each morning: freedmen, tradesmen, equestrians, even minor nobles. Some came for loans, others for legal protection. All came to owe him. He kept careful records, not just of coin lent or favors granted, but of humiliations endured. One senator reportedly kissed Crassus' feet during a legal trial. Another gave him his daughter in marriage in exchange for debt forgiveness. Crassus accepted both with the same blank smile. Rome was a city built on hierarchy, and Crassus manipulated that pyramid with surgical precision. He knew which magistrate needed a bribe, which jurist craved a villa, which priest hid a scandal. He didn't shout in the forum. He whispered in chambers, where candles guttered and documents changed hands. And he rarely forgot a betrayal. Still, for all his reach, Crassus lacked command. He was wealthy, influential, feared, but not yet respected. Then came Spartacus. In 73 BCE, a small band of gladiators escaped from Crassus' own school in Capua. At first, Rome laughed. Barefoot slaves couldn't threaten the Republic. But the laughter died quickly. Spartacus' rebellion swelled. What began as 70 men grew to 70,000. Slave after slave joined. Roman armies were humiliated. Cities were sacked. Senators panicked. Crassus saw his chance. He volunteered to lead the suppression effort. The Senate, desperate, agreed. And Crassus began his march, not just against Spartacus, but against obscurity. He fought with a ferocity that shocked even veterans. He reintroduced decimation, the ancient, savage punishment where every 10th man in a unit is beaten to death by his comrades. It hadn't been used in centuries. Crassus revived it without flinching. The legions, terrified into discipline, fought better. In 71 BCE, after months of maneuvering, Crassus cornered Spartacus' army in southern Italy. The final battle was brutal, mud, blood, and chaos. Spartacus was slain, though his body was never found. Crassus didn't care. He crucified over 6,000 captured rebels along the Appian Way. For over 100 miles, wooden crosses lined the road like grotesque signposts. The message was clear: defy Rome and suffer. But Crassus' victory came at a price. Pompey, returning from Hispania, arrived just in time to mop up the fleeing remnants of the rebellion and claimed credit in the Senate. Crassus was furious. He had done the killing, spilled the blood, issued the orders. Pompey had stolen the narrative. It would become the pattern of his life. He was always almost a hero. One strange relic survives from this period, a letter or perhaps a scribbled ledger entry, preserved in wax. It lists 47 gladiators, 2 amphorae of wine, and a crate of scented oils for funerals. Some historians believe it was part of Crassus' gladiator supply records. The oil, they speculate, was not for the dead, but for disguising the stench of decay when crucified bodies began to rot under the sun. Rome, after all, had a sensitive nose. And yet, after all of this, Crassus was still unsatisfied. He had money beyond counting. He had killed Rome's greatest internal threat. But when he walked through the Forum, he saw statues of others: Pompey the Great, Caesar the orator, Sulla the dictator. Where was Crassus? Where was his glory? He began to hunger not just for coin, but for immortality. And for that, he would need a new kind of war. It was said in the Senate halls that Crassus could fund the entire Roman state for a year out of his own purse, and still have enough silver to pave the Appian Way twice over. But wealth was not immortality. It did not place bronze statues in the Forum. It did not win the love of the people. And it certainly did not etch your name into the bones of empire. So Crassus, nearing 60, looked around at the titans of his age. Pompey had conquered the East and strutted across 3 continents. Caesar had become a populist hurricane, dazzling the masses with debt-fueled games and razor-sharp oratory. Even Cicero, a provincial nobody, had won eternal fame through his tongue alone. Crassus, the richest man in Rome, was remembered for real estate and fire insurance. He seethed. Rome at the time was not a republic in anything but name. It was a triangle of power, 3 men, each hungry, each wary: Crassus, Pompey, Caesar. They formed what modern historians call the First Triumvirate, an unofficial pact, sealed in whispers and coin. Crassus provided the money, Pompey the armies, Caesar the charm and vision. It was not friendship. It was a balancing act. And it worked until it didn't. Crassus' role in the alliance was clear: fund Caesar's political rise, support Pompey when needed, and in return, secure lucrative tax contracts for his allies and gain enough influence to finally shape policy. He succeeded in many ways. He pushed through tax rebates for the equestrian class, many of whom owed him personally. He expanded his already vast holdings in Syria. And crucially, he gained access to the Eastern Command, a province both wealthy and strategically vital. But even this wasn't enough. Victory on paper wasn't triumph. It wasn't the roar of the crowd, the perfume of laurel crowns, or the blood-washed gates of a conquered city. To earn that, Crassus needed war. He cast his gaze eastward. Beyond the Tigris and Euphrates lay the Parthian Empire, a kingdom of silk, cavalry, and gold. Rome had never fully subdued it, and Crassus, in his vanity, believed he could finish what others had failed. He saw it as Alexander's ghost calling to him. but others saw madness. The Parthians were not like the ragged slaves of Spartacus. They were mounted archers, swift and elusive. They knew the desert and fought like smoke, appearing, killing, vanishing. Even Caesar cautioned him. Pompey scoffed. The Senate grumbled. But Crassus would not be denied. He was consul again in 55 BCE and secured his command of Syria. The stage was set. The real estate mogul was going to play general once more. In Syria, Crassus prepared poorly. He alienated local allies. He ignored scouts. He underestimated the terrain and the enemy alike. He believed gold would carry him through. He brought with him 7 legions, around 35,000 men, and a personal treasury capable of funding a small nation. He even carried siege equipment into the desert, certain that Parthian cities would fall like dominoes before him. But Parthia didn't meet him with walls. They met him with wind. The Parthian general Surina was young, flamboyant, and devastatingly effective. He led a force of around 10,000 horse archers and 1,000 cataphracts, heavily armored cavalry. And he knew exactly how to deal with a Roman general who fought in straight lines. At Carrhae, a dusty outpost near the Euphrates, the trap was laid. Crassus marched his legions into flat, open desert. The sun burned overhead. The water ran low. The scouts went silent. Then the arrows began. Parthian archers unleashed a storm that seemed impossible. Their bows, composite and recurved, had twice the range of Roman ones. Their horses danced just beyond reach. For hours they circled, loosed, vanished. Roman shields built for hand-to-hand combat were near useless under the endless hail. Crassus ordered advances, but the Parthians retreated and rained more death. He ordered a retreat, but now the terrain betrayed him. His men began to break. The sand drank their blood. The greatest irony of Crassus' life. He could buy half the world, but he couldn't buy a drop of shade. Modern historians still argue whether the Roman defeat at Carrhae was due to Crassus' arrogance, poor intelligence, or sheer tactical ignorance. Some point to his refusal to take Armenian advice. Others blame his over-reliance on infantry. A fringe theory posits that Crassus had intended only a show of strength to intimidate, not conquer, and was trapped by his own general's ambition. Whatever the cause, the result was a massacre. Over 20,000 Roman soldiers died. 10,000 were taken prisoner. Many later resettled in faraway villages of eastern Iran, where descendants may have lived for generations. Crassus fled to the nearby town of Carrhae with the shattered remnants of his army. He tried to negotiate. Surina offered talks. And like a fool, Crassus agreed. The next day, Crassus rode out with a handful of officers. The meeting quickly turned tense. Tempers flared. A scuffle broke out. Accounts differ on what happened next. One version claims Crassus tried to draw his sword and was cut down. Another says Surina's men seized him and mocked him, forcing him to dress in Parthian robes before executing him in theatrical fashion. But one detail stands across every retelling. They poured molten gold into his mouth. The richest man in Rome died gagging on the symbol of his sin. It was a grotesque parody, a man consumed, quite literally, by his own avarice. His severed head was later used as a stage prop in a Greek tragedy performed for the Parthian king. His body was never recovered. Rome reeled. For a time, there was silence, no triumph, no funeral, no revenge. And then the wheel turned. Caesar crossed the Rubicon. Pompey fled. The Republic burned. And Crassus, ambitious, bitter, golden Crassus, was nothing more than a cautionary tale. A man who sought immortality and found furnace. The Parthians didn't just kill Crassus, they dismantled his image. They humiliated him in death with a performative cruelty that echoed across empires. His golden execution was a symbol, a bitter punchline for a man whose name had become synonymous with greed. But what happened after, the handling of his head, his legacy, his memory, was perhaps even more chilling. Surina, the Parthian general, had Crassus' severed head embalmed and sent east as a trophy. In Ecbatana, during a performance of the Bacchae by Euripides, the head was reportedly handed to an actor on stage as a stand-in for the head of Pentheus, torn apart for defying the gods. The audience laughed. This, then, was the afterlife of Marcus Licinius Crassus, a grotesque prop in someone else's play. Back in Rome, news traveled slowly. When the first whispers of the disaster at Carrhae reached the capital, many refused to believe them. How could Crassus, whose slaves numbered in the tens of thousands, who had financed entire legions, who had once owned parts of the city, die so pitifully? Senators scoffed. Some claimed it was enemy propaganda. Others blamed Crassus himself, calling him rash, deluded un-Roman. Caesar, for once, said very little. Pompey, however, was reported to have sneered, "Let the Parthians keep what they have, so long as they never send him back." It was a cruel remark, but not inaccurate. Rome never recovered Crassus' remains. He became the only member of the triumvirate to vanish bodily from Roman soil. But Rome did not forget him. His name lived on, in ledgers on plaques, in whispered curses. For decades after Carrhae, parents would invoke his name to frighten disobedient children. "Displease the gods," they'd say, "and you'll drink gold like Crassus." A minor cult developed around the belief that his death had unleashed a curse. That wherever excessive greed festered, his ghost wandered, clutching a molten jaw. There's no evidence for this, of course. But Roman superstition was rarely about evidence. It was about echoes. And Crassus echoed loudly. Even on a bureaucratic level, Crassus' legacy festered. The loss of his army in Parthia created a manpower crisis. For years, conscription rates spiked to cover the shortfall. Property taxes increased in eastern provinces. Trade with Parthia was disrupted. Rome bled, not just in bodies, but in coin. Worse still, the surviving legions, those who had surrendered or fled, were treated with suspicion and scorn. Some were never welcome home. A few were enslaved by their own people. And in the forums and temples, there hung a silent dread. If Crassus can fall, anyone can. Among the more curious fragments of his posthumous myth is a letter, half-burnt, retrieved from a villa near Brundisium during renovations centuries later. The handwriting was shaky, the ink faded, but scholars believe it to be a copy of Crassus' final correspondence, likely dictated just days before the catastrophe. In it he wrote, "I have never feared death, only obscurity. Let the East know my name, even if it is whispered in horror." He got his wish. The Parthians remembered him as the fool who charged the desert with siege engines. Rome remembered him as the man who mistook wealth for wisdom. And later historians, perhaps most cruelly, remembered him as the other guy in Caesar's story. Historians still debate the true motivation behind Crassus' final campaign. Was it strategic hubris? A desire to match Pompey and Caesar with a conquest of his own? Or was it a final act of desperation from a man growing old, watching the world pass him by? Some point to his son, Publius Crassus, as a key clue. Publius had fought valiantly in Gaul under Caesar. He was said to be brave, bright, and beloved by the troops. He died at Carrhae too, cut down while trying to protect his father's flank. Publius' death broke what little resolve Crassus had left. Witnesses say he collapsed upon hearing the news, wept openly, and refused food for a day. It's possible, some argue, that Crassus' march to negotiation the next morning wasn't just about diplomacy. It was about surrender. Not to the Parthians, to fate. And what of his vast fortune? It scattered like ash in a storm. Some was inherited by distant relatives. Much of it was seized by the state in the chaos that followed. A few of his freedmen tried to claim parts of the estate, but were blocked by rival factions. By the time Octavian rose to power, most of Crassus' personal fortune had disappeared. There is no mausoleum, no grand statue, just a name, and the sickening sound of molten gold hitting the back of a throat. One eerie fragment survives in the ruins of a villa long thought to be associated with Crassus' holdings near Capua. It's a fresco, blackened with soot, depicting a man feeding coins to a winged beast while fire climbs the walls around him. In the corner, barely visible, is a figure holding a bowl of molten metal, smiling faintly. Some say it was painted after Carrie, as a warning to whoever lived there next. Others claim it was older, a grim prophecy Crassus himself ignored. His political enemies said he got what he deserved. His supporters, fewer and fewer, claimed he had been misunderstood. But even they could not deny one thing. Crassus had finally been remembered. Not as a hero, not as a statesman, but as a man whose hunger swallowed him whole. In the stillness that followed his death, Crassus became something else. Not a man, not a memory, a warning. His molten execution turned into parable, his name into metaphor. Roman poets, eager to please the new regime, painted him as a cautionary symbol of unbridled ambition and spiritual emptiness. The man who measured worth in denarii, and was measured by none. But beneath the satire, the bust shattered in disgrace, and the sallow theater masks that mocked his final breath, something more unsettling endured. Marcus Licinius Crassus had almost won. Had he triumphed in Parthia, had he seized its riches, subjugated its kings, and returned to Rome a conquering hero, the balance of history might have tipped. Caesar and Pompey would have faced a third shadow, one as dominant and unrelenting. Imagine Crassus with Eastern coin and the loyalty of veteran legions. A new Alexander with Roman steel. Would Caesar have dared the Rubicon? Would Augustus have ever risen? It remains one of the Republic's sharpest historical what-ifs. Instead, fate chose spectacle over empire. The gods, if they were watching, laughed. There's a Roman kitchen manual dated to the early 1st century BCE, which lists a curious remedy for ulcers of the tongue, powdered silver mixed with rose honey. Scholars believe it was once part of Crassus' own household pharmacy. Perhaps ironic, then, that the man who had a treatment for oral pain would die by having metal forced down his throat. His body was denied the pyre, his ashes never gathered, and still the mouth lingers in every retelling, gaping, screaming, gold-choked. He is remembered not for his victories, but for the absence of a voice at the end. But Rome needed its martyrs, even if they were self-made. And in that way, Crassus served the Republic after all. The image of his demise bolstered the rhetoric of those who feared unchecked wealth and private armies. Senators invoked his death to caution against personal legions and foreign adventures. His molten fate was scrawled in graffiti across walls. Aurum sciens, aurum bibit. He thirsted for gold, and he drank it. Even centuries later, Christian preachers seized the story. Crassus became an emblem of earthly excess. In medieval sermons, his ghost was placed in a special circle of hell, forever consuming molten coins while demons jeered. None of it, of course, would have mattered to him. He didn't seek holiness. He sought memory. The Parthians preserved his legacy in silence. No statues, no celebrations, just a hushed tale passed among warriors of how they once slew the richest Roman, and how gold was not enough to save him. A few pieces of his army were absorbed, shields repurposed, tactics studied. And in dusty tombs outside ancient Hecatompylos, archaeologists found Roman-style gladii buried beside Parthian arrows. The past bleeds at the edges. Some speculate Crassus' surviving men resettled far east, fathered lineages that stretched into Chinese frontiers, becoming ghosts in a land their general never knew. His defeat at Carrhae was Rome's greatest loss since Cannae. But while Hannibal's name evoked terror, Crassus evoked pity. That was the final cruelty. As for the theater mask once rumored to use Crassus' embalmed head, the one that played Pentheus in Ecbatana, it was said to have vanished after the performance. Some say Surina kept it, nailed above his hearth. Others whisper that it was returned to Rome in secret years later, sealed in a jar and buried beneath the Temple of Saturn, as a token of unending debt. Whatever the truth, its absence only amplified the legend. A head without a body, a life without a grave, a man who became money in the end. Crassus had once tried to buy legitimacy, sponsor politicians, and ensure his legacy with coin. But memory is not a ledger. It keeps its own accounts. And when the final tally was made, Rome remembered Crassus not for what he owned, but for what he lacked. He had no heroism, no poetry, no glory. Only gold. And gold cannot speak for the dead. Wind down 300 words. In the waning light of Rome's republic, as shadows stretched long across marble columns and senators walked in silence through blood-streaked chambers, the name Crassus faded, but never vanished. He remains even now an echo, a presence, not in monuments or temples, but in the heavy hush that follows unchecked ambition, in the weight of silence when wealth fails, in the chill that creeps up the spine when legacy is measured in metal, not memory. His death, grotesque as it was, became more than punishment. It became prophecy, a foreshadowing of an empire that would soon devour itself. Men like Caesar and Pompey and Antony racing toward the same furnace. A republic that minted heroes with one hand and melted them down with the other. In the end, Crassus achieved what he most feared to lose. He was not forgotten. And perhaps, in that golden agony, as heat roared in his skull and molten or kissed the last of his breath, that was enough. He had fed the gods a performance so ghastly they could not look away. He had become a story no one could afford to ignore. So now, when coins clink together in the silence of a forgotten vault, listen closely. One of them might be him.